Pleased to be joined by Dinesh D'Souza, of course, critically acclaimed filmmaker, New York Times bestselling author of the just-released United States of Socialism, Who's Behind It, Why It's Evil, How to Stop It. Dinesh, thanks for joining us again. Appreciate it.
Hey, it's my pleasure. Good to be on the show.
It's great to have you back. And apply the thesis of your new book with what you're seeing on the streets of America.
Well, what we're seeing on the streets of America is, I think, nothing less than a paramilitary force that I don't think has existed in the United States quite in this way. You found it in Europe in the 20s and 30s, the Mussolini black shirts, for example, or Hitler's brown shirts. These are socialist parties that felt that they needed some street gangs to beat up dissenters, beat up their political opponents, and also beat up small businessmen. My wife is from Venezuela, and currently in Venezuela, you've got the same thing, a paramilitary force called the colectivos. A lot of them are criminals, but they're armed by the regime. They're given, cement blocks, sticks, bats, and they beat up shopkeepers, and they beat up members of the political opposition. So what I find really alarming is that apparently there are people in powerful positions in the media, in Hollywood, and in the Democratic Party, including in the mayor's office in New York, who are okay with all this and actually tacitly encouraging it, which means that Antifa has friends in high places.
Right, and that's the thing. I mean, President Obama yesterday, when he did that town hall with students and our Mayor Lightfoot, their message seems to be protect the protesters before you protect the citizens and before you protect police.
Yeah, I mean, Obama's been the instigator of a lot of this. I mean, literally, for him to deliver a national address is like Al Capone having a national symposium on how to fix the crime problem. With Obama, when he was a community organizer, he would talk about how to stoke the fires of people's differences and create resentments, literally create resentments. So here's the point. A lot of conservatives even are saying, we don't like the looters and the rioters, but we're okay with the protesters. But I'm actually not okay with the protesters, not because, I obviously agree that the killing of George Floyd was terribly unjust, but I disagree with the narrative. The narrative is that this kind of thing is typical, that the cops are chronically racist, that America is chronically racist, that we've been this way since 1619. That is the agitprop that our universities and our media have been drilling into people. That's what convinces them to, throw a Molotov cocktail in New York. So it's that larger narrative, I think, that is deceptive and wrong and evil. And yet that's the narrative that's being pushed out there, even by the peaceful protesters.
There's something else pernicious I wanted to get your comment on, or at least I think it is. I made the point earlier in the week, former Baltimore Mayor Stephanie Rawlings Blake, who presided over the rioting in Baltimore after the Freddie Gray killing in police custody.
In 2015.
And made the infamous statement about creating a safe space for rioters. And she was ridiculed at the time. 5 years later, it's actually the policy of all of these big city mayors. They just use different language to couch it. They say the police exercise great restraint as a cover for their rules of engagement, which is to create a safe space for the rioters.
Yes, and I don't know if you've seen on social media these really embarrassing pictures of policemen taking a knee, even National Guardsmen doing it, and then these rituals of self-abasement. In one of them, a young white couple is asked by these Black Lives Matter guys to kiss their feet, and so they keep kissing their feet. And, this is in America. So I find all of this really to be, it's almost a certain kind of malaise of the American soul here because, and it also shows, by the way, a new direction of socialism. Traditionally, socialism was all about class. When Marx thought about a socialist, he thought about a union guy who was not getting proper wages. But now it's all about race and gender and identity politics. And so in the book, I call it identity socialism because it's a weird marriage of classic socialism and identity politics. That's the shape of socialism today.
Well, and what you're talking about, the National Guard taking a knee, that was in California. And the reason why they did that, Dinesh, is because the protesters said either you walk with us or you take a knee or we're going to start looting. And that's why they succumbed to the protesters. But again, they should have stood up and, you don't take a knee.
Well, they don't realize what the ritual means, and I get it. These are nice guys. They think, what's wrong with taking a knee? I mean, if I could prevent someone from getting hurt, why not do it? But what they don't realize, it's kind of like saying, listen, in order to avoid trouble, just sort of do the swastika salute. It's no big deal. All you have to do is raise your hand and shout Heil Hitler, and that's all there is to it. But no, that ritual is actually not what you should be doing because of the meaning, the underlying meaning it conveys. It's not the mere raising of a hand. It's what that conveys.
Right. What's the history of appeasement in the face of barbarism?
Exactly. And so I think Trump, in a strange way, even though Trump is, people say, oh, well, he's such a bull in a china shop and so on. The truth of it is he is what stands between chaos and the rest of us. So I think that message is going to resonate. I can't even believe the Democrats in major cities who voted for these guys are going to be okay with rioters, not just in pockets of New York, but marching up 54th Street and, 6th Avenue and smashing stores and making it unsafe for anybody on the street. If that's what is this what Democrats really want?
Dan Henninger, writing the Wall Street Journal this morning, says what we have on the streets of America right now is worse than 1968 because the political system is now engaged in a systemic act of forget that the policy failures that have happened or why they happened, forget, for instance, people living in New York's public housing that are overrun with rats and unlit hallways and no heat in the winter. And the other thing that makes it worse than 68, in my estimation, is where the culture has gone over the last 50 years and the infrastructure the left and the identitarians of which you speak have been able to build over that time, even just in the last decade. That makes it qualitatively different and more dangerous than 68.
Also, I think that conservatives are often pointing out to the bias in the media. Look at the way you covered Trump versus the way you covered Obama. And the problem with all this is that it is a tacit appeal to some higher sense of impartiality or objectivity, and the double standard is intended to draw attention to that. But I think we have a media now that actually doesn't even care. Even the old sort of CNN, model where you have crossfire and you at least give the impression that you've got two sides and you're trying to represent both and hear them out and have a debate, that's kind of gone from American politics. And so I think, in a sense, this is maybe even be our biggest problem, even more than Trump's re-election, because it affects every election.
Well, clearly, I mean, the example a prime example right now of what you're talking about is the hysteria over at the New York Times because they published a op-ed by a sitting United States senator with respect to a policy that you can agree or disagree with, but it's a lawful policy. This would be sending in military into these cities that are war-torn, Tom Cotton being the senator. You can say, as Mark Esper said, I don't think the Insurrection Act of 1807 should be invoked. I don't think we need to do it at this point, so on and so forth. But the idea that that op-ed should have not even been published is what's remarkable.
Yeah, I think we're going to have to move toward a position in which we just see these media outlets for what they are. I mean, the New York Times represents a kind of upper Manhattan left-wing perspective, and that's what it is. It's not the newspaper of record. It's not publishing all the news that's fit to print. We don't need to pay any particular attention to it. Half the time when they say up, we should automatically think down. So I think we are seeing, though, on our side, not only an ability now to see through things that wasn't there before. Think of how the traditional Republican would either go into the fetal position or just run for cover every time there was a media expose. I think part of what Trump has shown us is you don't have to do that. You don't have to run from the fray. You can be in the fray, and you can even come out unscathed.
Is it too cynical, too conspiratorial to suggest with the recent data, and the lockdown policies predating the burn down approach, that half of Black Americans, more than half now, are unemployed after historically low unemployment pre-pandemic? So you have mostly lower to middle income, disproportionately minorities in the service sector that comprise the 20% unemployed in this country, concentrated in big cities. So you have big city mayors and blue state governors of big states that have, through lockdown policies, allowed their champagne socialist friends to be protected, while constituencies that they need are in a position where they may have to become even more dependent, generally speaking, on government than they were pre-pandemic. Is it too cynical to suggest perhaps design there?
Well, I don't think design in the sense of something that was orchestrated from the outset, but I do think that the left has recognized that the only way to move in the socialist direction is to deploy at full force the politics of fear. Marx had predicted that the revolution would come automatically through the discontent of the working class, but that's never happened anywhere in the world. And so since then, the left is using, I would call it the FDR model. FDR was able to push things through because of the atmosphere of fear surrounding the Depression. He did things that he could never have done otherwise. And since then, the left has been always trying to whip us up into a frenzy. In the 70s, the earth was running out of food. In the 80s, nuclear winter. In the 90s, there goes the ozone layer. For the last 20 years, the oceans have been rising and the glaciers have been disappearing and the penguins have been coughing. But it's all the same thing. It's all basically, go nuts, adopt a crowd psychology, stampede, and do things that in calm, rational moments you would never do.
Maybe it's the penguins that are the source of the COVID-19.
Yeah.
Dinesh D'Souza, a critically acclaimed filmmaker, New York Times bestselling author. His new offering, United States of Socialism. Who's behind it? Why it's evil? How to stop it? Dinesh, thanks as always for joining us. Good luck with the book.
My pleasure.
Thank you. And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.
It's like a hot, steaming cup of information to start your day. It's Chicago's Morning Answer on AM 560. The Answer.
You're stuck at home and you're concerned about the world, and frankly, worried about your money. The market's in turmoil and your 401k is going down. Is this going to ruin your retirement?